This is the all-new Sigma 70-200 f2.8, and a lot of people were waiting a long time for this lens. This was released in November of 2023, and I think that the reason it's so long anticipated is because the Sony version of this lens is $3,000 or almost $3,000. Now, I'm not the biggest connoisseur of telephoto zoom lenses, you guys probably already know that, but after using this lens for just a week or so, I've grown to appreciate it, and if I shot full frame, I would definitely pick up one of these things. So let's jump into it. In typical Sigma fashion, it comes in a large white box. Inside is a little box with a strap, a user manual and warranty info, and a zippered padded case. Inside is the lens, which comes with plastic front and rear lens caps and a lens hood. The lens is solidly built, it feels premium. Sigma has a way of manufacturing that makes quality seem apparent as soon as you hold it. In my opinion, these lenses, along with their Art series, feel better than most Sony GM lenses. This one is pretty big though, at about 8.5 inches in length. The weight is nearly 3 pounds, and this is a 3-pound lens even though it is made out of lightweight magnesium, Sigma's thermally stable plastic, and carbon reinforced plastic. Starting at the rear, there is a metal mount, electronic connections, and a weather sealing gasket. The entire lens is dust and splash resistant with numerous gaskets throughout. 0.23 here for the 2023 release, minimum focusing distance of 2.13 feet, made in Japan, and then you get to this bracket, which can be easily rotated with this knob here, but I can't seem to figure out how to remove it apart from removing these screws. It is Arca Swiss though, so that's good. It seems like it would save at least half a pound of weight if you could remove this easily, but I don't think Sigma wants you to. Lens specs up on top, Sigma logo here, and a lock switch to lock the aperture ring into or out of auto. There are 5 more switches here to control autofocus, a focus range limiter, 3 optical stabilization settings, custom buttons, and finally click on or off for the aperture ring. The aperture ring is solid, nice and clicky, and it feels good to rotate. In front of that is a manual focus ring, which is also very smooth but electronic, so it rotates infinitely in either direction. Up next, there are not 1, not 2, but 3 custom buttons that I guess are programmable for various functions. And then at last you get to the zoom ring. This zoom ring is all the way at the front of the lens, which you may or may not prefer, and it rotates the opposite direction of typical lenses, so clockwise zooms out. All of the zooming is done internally, so the lens does not change its length, and I have to say the zoom ring is buttery smooth with very good dampening and a nice little whoosh sound if you move it quickly. Around the front, large front lens element, but nothing else. No writing or specs here, it's nice and clean. And with the lens hood, which adds about a good 2 inches to the overall length, this looks like a formidable professional lens. It's a bit large compared to the small A7C camera body that I have attached to it. So as it sits now, there are 3 modern competitors in this space. You have the Sony G Master, which is about $2,800 US, so not budget oriented. You have the Tamron 70-180 version G2, which is improved in build and also has added image stabilization, which is very important. I haven't tested that lens yet though. And then you have this Sigma. So let's see what this thing is capable of. All of these shots are done on my Sony A7C. This is, at this point, a budget 8-bit full frame camera. All of these shots are straight out of the camera, no editing, no post-processing, no filters, no picture profiles. Let's see what it's capable of. Ready, set, go. And well, there's not much to say about this lens in terms of optics. It is brilliant, Very sharp in the center of the frame, very sharp in the corners, wide open. Every single sample photo that you just saw was shot at f2.8, and as far as I can tell, there are no weak spots in the focal range. I've read that this lens is a little bit softer at 200 millimeters compared to the rest of the range, but in my testing, you would be hard pressed to notice any difference. All of my shots at 200 millimeters look sharp, certainly to a level of adequately sharp. Flaring is exceptionally well controlled, although I didn't take the lens hood off at all, so I'm sure that helped. The thing about this lens is that if you shoot into the sun, you normally would get a lot of lost contrast, but here you just don't. It's rare to see this type of performance. As far as chromatic aberration, it's almost non-existent, it's very well controlled, it's not an issue, and barrel distortion as well as pincushion distortions are also well checked as long as you keep the in-camera corrections on, which I did. The colors are vibrant and contrasty with no picture profiles or fancy editing. These are all just straight out of my camera, and a budget camera at that. Now there are a couple of things that I wanted to mention. First is the OS or optical stabilization, which is impressively good. If you try to use this lens without it at 200 millimeters, this is what it looks like, and once you switch it on, here is what that looks like. Sigma says this provides 7.5 stops of stabilization at the wide end, but at the telephoto end, this drops to a more realistic 5.5 stops. This is definitely beyond what an IBIS can do, and without this stabilization, it really would not be the same lens. Secondly, focus breathing is a non-issue with this lens. So for video work, for focus pulls, if you are shooting wedding videos, this lens will not disappoint. You don't need a fancy Sony camera body with focus breathing compensation. This lens is designed to have almost no focus breathing by itself without any fancy hardware or software. Third thing, autofocus performance on this lens. It's fast, it's silent, it's accurate. Near silent. It makes a little bit of noise, but you can't really tell. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it is better than the Sony G Master's autofocus performance, because if you are pushing it, it won't be. If you're pushing it in the sense of you're using it on a Sony A1, you're shooting 30 frames per second at a subject that's running towards you, definitely pay double for the Sony version of this lens. But if you're using this like 90% of other photographers and videographers out there who are going to be using this lens for portraits, nature shots, weddings, travel, then the autofocus performance is more than sufficient and will not leave you wanting more. For a telephoto lens, this is one of the best autofocusing systems that I've tested. And the last thing that I want to mention is the ergonomics, because when I was reading about this lens, a lot of people were complaining about the zoom ring being all the way out on the front, about it rotating the wrong direction, and after using it, I personally kind of like it. I think it's almost easier to be smooth because you separate your hands in a way that creates more stability than a narrower two-handed grip, and the rotation to me felt natural with my left hand moving the zoom counterclockwise. It felt better than the typical clockwise rotation, although I do understand that this can get confusing if you are swapping lenses and have to constantly adjust which direction to go for your desired result. But at the end of the day, I don't think that anyone buying this lens is going to be disappointed. It's $1,500 US, which is about half the price of the G Master, but still a few hundred more than that Tamron 70-180. And that Tamron is, at least per the specs, smaller and lighter than this Sigma, so if you want the absolute smallest setup, the Tamron is the way to go. If you want flawless high-speed tracking autofocus performance, the Sony is the way to go. And also, if you plan on using teleconverters, that Sony is also a good choice for that. But I think for a majority of people, this Sigma hits that sweet spot of optical near perfect performance for a very competitive, dare I say, reasonable price. So I like this lens. If you guys have watched my recent video I posted a couple of days ago, I really want to have a lens similar to this, designed specifically for APS-C sensors, because if they could shrink this down and still give us that same coverage of 70 to 200 millimeter equivalent, f2.8 in a smaller, more budget-friendly package, I would absolutely go out and buy that thing for my APS-C cameras. As it sits right now, my only negative about this lens really is the size and the weight. It's big. It is a little bit on the heavier side as well, but that comes with the territory of having a fast 70 to 200 millimeter. All of those lenses are pretty big. Even the smaller Tamron is still pretty significant in size. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below. Out of those three lenses that I mentioned, which one is your favorite? Which one would you pick up, or which one do you own? Curious to read those comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. Special thank you to Sigma for sending out this lens for a review. Stay tuned for more. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.